So this creates the problem that just because Celsus assumes Jesus existed, that doesn't tell us that he knows that's the case.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to delve into historical Jesus and Celsus, the critic, one of the most popular critics other than Porphyry, very early on, that really scared the living shit out of Christians in terms of their critiques, so much so that centuries of writings were trying to bury this guy's criticisms. And I have a Patreon member, Dr. Carrier. Welcome back. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
Prince Arum, A-U-R-U-M, thank you so much for the super chat and being super chat question really from the Patreon, actually. So again, if you haven't become one, join the family. We can use your help. What is your opinion on people using the pagan critic of Christianity, Celsus, as a source for the historical Jesus? Celsus attacks Christianity and Jesus, pulling no punches, yet he treats Jesus as a historical character who is nothing more than a man. What historicists sometimes argue is that if there were any good evidence against the existence of Jesus, Celsus would have used it to attack Christianity. He doesn't make such a claim or bring evidence against the existence of Jesus. Therefore, Jesus likely existed. Giving this simplified argument and the fact that Celsus must have done a significant amount of research to argue against Christians, is it fair to use Celsus as a source for the historical Jesus? One comment, though.
Yeah.
Porphyry, according to Litwa, Porphyry knew way more about Christianity than Celsus.
Yeah, as best we can tell, that's true. Yeah, so first of all, we don't have Celsus. This is important to remind. All the critics of Christianity were destroyed. It's important to note that that wasn't a chance accident. There's a reason why all criticism of Christianity was erased from the historical record. It wasn't, so like you gotta oh, I just lost it. No, the only reason we know anything about these books, Porphyry, Celsus, and others, by the way, there's more. There was a critic in the 3rd century before Porphyry, and in the 4th century, we have some others. So the problem is that we only have quotations, select quotations from Origen. So Origen made decisions as to what to quote and what to critique and respond to. So we don't know that we have a complete text of Celsus, and we don't know that we have everything in there. But we can try to guess based on what does get quoted, what Origen, you would think anything provocative Origen would have not left out, because he needs to rebut it. So yeah, you can say that from what we can tell from what Origen is saying about Celsus and what he said in his argument, we can tell that Celsus only had the Gospels and he had no other sources. Other than contemporary eyewitness stuff for himself, he was witness street preachers and stuff.
And wasn't he also using Jewish polemics? He was aware.
So yeah, so he's writing in the 160s. This is important to note. So this is already 130 years after Christianity began.
Right.
His only sources for Christians are the people he's talking to right then and the Gospels, right, and that's it. He doesn't have any other documents. He clearly didn't research. He didn't read Pliny the Elder's history and find a passage about Jesus there.
Yeah.
He didn't find. He doesn't seem to be aware of the letters of Paul, or at least very, very well versed in them. Or he's certainly not finding documents memoirs from the early 1st century. He doesn't have any new evidence. It's just the gospel. So he's just reacting to what the Christians are publishing at that time. And so that we can kind of guess pretty sure is the case. And you would ask, wait, what did you just ask us?
Well, I know that I've spoken to scholars who study Celsus, and they say,
oh, the Jewish,
right? Yeah, some of the arguments sound like he's aware of Jewish polemics against them.
Maybe. So certainly what Celsus, so whatever the book was, we don't have the book, so we're kind of guessing based on what we have. It sounds like it was written as a dialogue, so a Platonic dialogue. And there's some sort of dumb yokel Christian character, and they're arguing with possibly a philosopher. We're not sure if there's a Platonic philosopher there, but also a Jew. And it's very similar to the Trifo of Justin. Yeah. Where Justin makes up a Jewish opponent to argue with.
Right.
Where he might be characterizing Jewish arguments, although it's in his interest to mischaracterize them. So if you figure like, how do Christians portray atheist arguments against Christianity? Would you trust that?
No.
No. So we can't really guess whether, like, can't really know whether Justin is correctly representing how Jews actually argued against Christians. He's presenting the arguments the way he wants them to be. Like, he wants the Jewish arguments to be these so that he can rebut them. And I would think, like, for his they were talking about Justin now, for his treatise to work, they have to at least be close enough to actual Jewish polemics that the treatise would be useful for combating them. But that doesn't mean that it's totally reliable. The stuff's going to get left out. Stuff's going to get distorted. Like, stuff's going to be put in there that isn't really accurate. One of the examples that I often give that's unrelated to the Jewish issue is Christians are constantly claiming that their critics accuse them of being atheists. And then that sets up a foil for them to bid this, no, we're not atheists. We believe in God, yada, yada. Whereas when you look at the actual critiques that come from like Jewish or we have more of pagan sources, that is never the accusation. They never claim Christians are atheists. They claim they're superstitious, which is a very different accusation. It means, so when Plutarch wrote On Superstition, he said there's a difference between atheists and the superstitious. So like the superstitious are worse because they excessively fear the gods. And so they do like silly, stupid things because of their beliefs in the God. So being superstitious is worse than being atheist. And yet atheist is bad already, right? So that's his, and so he's very distinctive of like how he critiques religions he thinks are bogus.
Right.
It's not they're atheists, they're superstitious.
Gotcha.
And we get this repeatedly throughout all the critics. They all frame it this way. They never frame it as Christians are atheists. So when you see the Christians claiming that other people call them atheists, I think that's a fake polemic, right? They're being accused of being superstitious, so they change it to atheist because it's easier to rebut the atheism argument because it's easier about that. Like, that's a straw man, right? So in this classic, we see this with Christian apologists today, where they'll straw man the argument and dismantle that straw man, and they'll go, yes, and pump their chests. We defeated it. And you go, but that wasn't the argument.
Could it be, if I get a little pushback, could it be that the civic duties of, the gods of the cities and things like that, the fact that they're denying lighting candles or whatnot and showing honor to the gods, then they are able to easily slip in the accusation of suggesting you guys are clearly against civic duties. You're atheist in that sense.
Yeah, it's plausible. We just have no evidence of that. Like, all the evidence is the other way around.
Gotcha.
So there's just not really an evidence of that being the case. I talk about this, by the way, with citations and stuff and examples in Not the Impossible Faith, which is one of my forgotten books, although it's a fun read. It was written specifically to rebut a book called The Impossible Faith. And the title is designed so that when people search for the Christian apologist book, my book shows up right underneath it. So anyway, there's a lot of interesting stuff in that book. And that was written before I was a mythicist. So it's actually written during my era as a historicist. Anyway, so I cover this aspect that I think that's a polemic. So the point is that when we get back to looking at Celsus, yeah, he has a Jewish character making arguments, but how well informed is that? Like, did Celsus really hang out with some Jewish buddies and like, what's your best argument? Like, or did he just invent a Jewish character and decide on his own to put arguments in their mouth? We can't tell. Like, the arguments don't seem to be like that sophisticated in terms of like that kind of thing. So I don't
hearsay or something he's incorporated.
Yeah, I mean, there's dumb things like, well, the women were crazy. They were just hysterical. It's that kind of attitude. Now, because we don't have the setup, so like the introduction, which explains all of this, so we're not really sure what Celsus thought he was doing or what he wanted his readers to think he was doing. We don't really know how it resolves. So, like, we don't have the whole picture of this. But best guess, based on what we have, it sounds like he's just taking the position, which is a really, like, well-argued position to take in rhetoric. So, like, you got to understand, these guys go through rhetoric school. This is, like, their number one source of grad school is you're taught rhetoric. Like, how do you win arguments? Literally, that's like the number one thing. There are really only two grad schools the equivalent of back then is philosophy and rhetoric. And usually philosophers expected you to do both. So you had to do like your master's in rhetoric and then do a PhD in philosophy. They didn't have those terms back then, but they had like the equivalents of this. And for people who want to know about that, I have a whole book on the ancient education system, which is the science education in the early Roman Empire. That little book goes through the entire education system. It focuses on science, but it covers everything, including what I just said here about how the levels of education. Point being, though, is anybody's writing at the level of Celsus, they've been through rhetoric school, right? So he knows about the concept of granting a position for argument a fortiori, right? Like he knows, like this goes all the way back to Aristotle and others. Is like you can just grant a premise and then refute them, and that's actually more effective than trying to deny the premise. So this creates the problem that just because Celsus assumes Jesus existed, that doesn't tell us that he knows that's the case. It's just an easier position to fight from because you say, you know, I'm just going to grant that premise so we don't get in the weeds on that question, and then refute your religion based on your own premise that he existed, and then do that, right? So, and he wouldn't say it that way. He wouldn't like show the engine of his reasoning. He's not going to expose his cards, right?
So
He's just going to argue that way.
this is already an uphill battle because we don't have we have quotes of his material.
This is what I was getting
Only
to.
have quotes of his material through what they like to call proto-Orthodox Christians.
That's right.
They're already gospel
Yeah.
narrative Christians. They're not mythicist Christians.
Yeah,
So
no, that's absolutely right as well. Although it's important to note that Origen, who is our only response to Celsus, we only know Celsus through Origen. He was later declared a heretic for some interesting reasons, but he himself is a double truther. So he thinks that the Gospels are really written as allegory for the elite to understand, but the yokels are supposed to understand it literally. And because of that, you're not supposed to say this out loud, right? Like, so like he puts it in his books, but he's expecting yokels can't read books. So he's thinking they'll never find out that he said this, right? But the point is never tell the yokels that they're not true. You need them to believe that they're true, even though we are like higher level thinkers and we know they're not literally true, yada, yada. So anyway, I quote a lot of this in, there's articles you can find. I have an article on the literalism of ancient Christians where I go into this origin point, the concept of double truth, which was popular among many people. Eusebius throws a nod to it and stuff. So we know this was a thing. Anyway, so the point being is that an Origen, even in his critique of Celsus, does kind of play with this a little bit, you just don't understand the Gospels, or they have deeper meaning and stuff. So that's like his last ditch defense. Like if he can't defend the historicity of something, he goes to this. It's like, well, you don't need to defend the historicity of that because it has a deeper meaning, yada, yada. And you just don't know because you're an outsider, and then walks off. He doesn't really tell you what the secret meaning is. He just says, it exists and you just don't know it. You don't understand what you're talking about, and then he walks away, drops mic or whatever.
yeah.
So anyway, that's the conversation going on. So this gets then to the problem that what would Celsus even, like suppose Celsus wanted to challenge the premise that Jesus existed. Now, rhetorically, he would be disinclined to because that's a losing way to go because it's way harder.
Excuse me.
Yeah. So it's way harder to argue that. Like you're making your job harder if you're going to try and deny the historicity of Jesus. It's just easier to grant that premise so that you could fight on all the other ramparts, essentially, right? So the question is, like, suppose he wanted to do that. How would he? Right? Like 160 AD, he clearly only has the Gospels. He has no first century sources. He has nothing. So how would he know Jesus didn't exist? Like he can't win that argument, right? Like you say, like Jesus didn't exist. It was like, how do you know that? There's just like, you don't have any evidence of that. And he was like, yeah, you're right. I don't have any evidence of that.
But
right?
again, to your point, if the sources he has are the Gospels, the opponents would be those who hold the Gospels in high esteem, as if these narratives really happen, or somehow they believe.
Yeah, which gets to the whole point of like the anti-Christian polemic is generally mocking, right? So it's very Hitchensy. Like, we're going to make fun of this bullshit. And so, like, a lot of, I think, the fun that Celsus gets out of taking this pose is that he gets to mock the Gospels and make fun of them, right? Because a lot of his arguments are like, how this is stupid, this is a joke, yada, yada. I've seen, like, crazy street preachers just like this, yada, yada. Oh, the women were just hysterical. Like, it's an opportunity to get that ad hominem in to, like, make fun of Christians for being so gullible that they believe these stories.
Based on the story.
Right, exactly. So, like, and he can do it by relying on things they don't deny, right? So, like, if he says, look at your story about the women, they must have been hysterical and you just fell for it, right? It's harder for Christians to respond to that because you're not saying like, oh, those women were never there. Well, then they can go in a huff or like, yes, they were. It changes the argument. But whereas if he's mocking, he's using their own premise against them.
Yeah.
It's a much more effective.
It's almost like what you do sometimes where you just play into the historical Jesus
That's right.
model and not waste your time.
Yeah, every time I debate the resurrection of Jesus, I presume historicity because anything else would be a distraction and make the argument harder. Like I can win that argument made more easily by granting historicity.
Right.
And that's the same thing Celsus is doing.
So you're technically saying I should invent a time machine and go back in time and interview the guy and ask him, hey man, like, what are you doing? Are you assuming the guy existed and all these things he did happened? And if he goes, well, I don't think those things happened, and I don't even know if the guy existed at all, but why waste my time when I'm trained in school? I mean, I know how to debate.
Yeah.
I cannot, that premise, we're never going to even be able to meet on this. I could just, with the shit they already have, work with.
It's so fucking funny. That's where you get like the attitude of like people will argue for the Tacitus passage, right? There's this passage in Tacitus where he talks about supposedly Christians, and the modern apologetic argument would be like, well, surely Tacitus must have researched this, right? Like, how else would he have that in there? He was such a good historian, right? Like, he would research it, and it's like you really don't understand the rhetorical context, like. If Tacitus wrote what Christians think he wrote, like if he wrote what we have there, the moment he heard the story, like just a Christian will walk up to him, like this is 100 years later, goes up to him and says, "Yeah, we believe in a guy who was executed for sedition, in like a Jew. We worship a Jew who's executed for sedition, you know, right?" And he would laugh his ass off, and like, "You guys are so pathetic," and he would think like that they couldn't be lying about that because that's so ridiculous. Why would they make themselves look so ridiculous? And so he wouldn't have a reason to research it, right? Like why would he even check that? Because it's funny as is for him, right? Like from his point of view. So anyway, that's the same thing with like Celsus. Like why? Like he would be sitting there and is like, "Did this guy even exist? Can I find out?" And like he might, even if he thought that, he'd be like, "No, I can't. There's nothing to argue there. I can't argue he didn't exist because." How do I know what happened 100 years ago? There's no documents. All I've got are these gospels. What am I supposed to do with that, right?
Right.
So he comes up with the rhetorical argument. Is I know what I'll do with that. I'll just grant everything in there and just fucking make fun of it.
That's the easiest way to go.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way to know without being able to ask him. Is my point too. It's like, because
true. Also, or at least having the book. We don't have the book, right? So we would know more if we had the complete text. But you're right, even if we had the complete text, we can't necessarily get into his head, especially if we have nothing else written by him, right? So like, because this is not, now if we could find a stash of all his books, well, then we might be able to know more. So there's so many writers named Celsus back then. But anyway.
I want to, so not for this video, we need to put 2 Peter to the shelf and what you've done in your new book for another video. But I do want to ask you this. Are there any ancient voices that within the first 5-6 centuries of Christian origins seem to indicate a doubt of this guy existing at all, even though they're at a distance?
Yeah, from critics of Christianity?
Any.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, from the critics, so far as we can tell, that is, they just find the religion so funny that there's no reason to even go there, so they never do go there. The Lucian is an example where he like mocks Christians for believing Peregrinus. He wrote all these literature. There's a really interesting theory that Peregrinus is Ignatius.
Yeah,
it's Roger Parvis wrote a really good book that I can't say that it conclusively proves it, but it's a good, like, it's, if you want to see like the best, your prime suspect, like it is a good prime suspect. Like it would pass at a grand jury, but I don't know if it would pass at a trial.
Ignatius or Irenaeus?
Ignatius.
Ignatius.
Okay, so Ignatius is usually thought to have written in the 110s because there's some text that's kind of, we suspect, interpolated and stuff.
Yeah, of course.
So, but the majority of Ignatius experts now think 140s. They're talking about 140s, which, you know, roughly. And so like that would fit the timeline. And Parvis has more arguments than that, but he goes into like, actually Ignatius sounds like Peregrinus. Maybe that it's the same people, right? And so it's possible. But it's certainly, even if they aren't the same, they're in the same zeitgeist of the same generation, right? That's
I got to
the same thing.
Yeah. I'd like a whole polished video.
Right, on Lucian and this whole thing. But yeah, he's doing the same thing. Like, you Christians are so laughable. Why would you believe any of this stuff? And so, yeah, he just takes for granted that it's true because the truth is funnier, frankly. Like, if you're worshiping an executed criminal, that's hilarious. Right. So like, you wouldn't even think to challenge that. Like, why would that, you know, it would take the joke away. It would almost ruin the joke.
It's almost like when I say some mythicists that are like, not like you, where they're like probabilistic. They sound almost like he had to have not existed.
Yeah.
And they act like that's by chance. And I have to explain them, like, my friends, listen, I've been on both sides of this, and like, I don't know where I land some days, but I'll tell you, like, do you not see, because they seem more like they just want Christianity to be false. And I'm like, dude, you can take the failed prophet angle. You can take the like, there's so many problems.
Right, that have much higher probability premises.
Yeah.
You don't need to rely on a low probability premise. Don't toss that. That's a bad way to go. Yeah. So, and it's also worth pointing out that the only reason that I can get to any kind of probability that he didn't exist is that I'm using modern, sophisticated methods over a wide array of data that Celsus either he would not have the methodology to do, and also would not have had access to all this stuff. Even if he theoretically could have had, he typically would not have in the atmosphere of this time. So Celsus could not have written on the historicity of Jesus, right? Like that's not like he didn't have the methodology, he didn't have the background knowledge, he didn't have the sort of data that we can see in hindsight that wouldn't have been as obvious to him.
Yeah.
Or as easily for him to get a hold of, because we've got like thousands of years of accumulated evidence that we can like pile up,
and thousands of people doing the looking for.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. And finding all the like how does the scientific anthropology and all of that stuff. So anyway, so yeah, so we can't really argue for the historicity of Jesus from Celsus or from Lucian, because Lucian,
Celsus,
same time, by the way. Lucian and Celsus are contemporaries.
Right.
Yeah. So
is there any voices though that doubt you know?
But yes, to get back to that, I do think the answer is yes to this. So there's an open question about Trypho. So we talked about Trypho before, and like this. So was Justin hinting that some Jews doubt the historicity of Jesus? I think the answer is yes, but it's not a smoking gun, right? Also, I think their doubt was not based on information. It was just snarky doubt, right? Like that's probably made up, right? Like they didn't have evidence that it was made up. So you can't cite that as evidence against historicity either, right? So even if you could establish that, and that's already an argument, is like, did he say that? Did he not say that? Yada, yada. And also it's through multiple layers of fiction. You know, it's like, that's the terrible source. But we have actual Christian sources where Christians are arguing against fellow Christians. And this is the thing, right? So Ignatius is a perfect example. It's probably the most important example because he's the nexus of all of this.
Yeah.
Is Ignatius seems, and you mentioned 2 Peter, which is straightforward. He's arguing definitely against fellow Christians. These Christians who were apparently accusing the Gospels of being made up myths, cleverly contrived myths. So they're, you know, that's a polemical way of putting it, but it sounds like they're being reverent about this. They're not mocking. They're not doing the Lucian or Celsus thing. They're not saying your myths are ridiculous.
They're saying they're sophisticated.
They're saying, yeah, they're sophisticated and important, but they're symbolic. They're not literally true. And so 2 Peter invents an eyewitness testimony to refute this. So he's
right. We beheld his glory.
What are you talking about? I was there. I met the dude, right? Yeah. So like that tells us that these other Christians were denying that. They were denying that Peter met Jesus in life and stuff like that. So that's clue number one. And then you keep going, you go through the clues. There's a ton of them. They add up. Ignatius is another one. Ignatius talks about these other Christians, and he's doing the same thing 2 Peter did, which is he's saying these people are evil, horrible, bad people. You should never talk to them. You should never read their stuff. You should shun them. And it's like, dude, they're clearly saying something that's bothering you.
Right.
And so Ignatius does the same thing. It's like, these people are evil. He literally calls them atheists. You know, it's like they're godless, you know, the godless, horrible people. You should shun them. You should never talk to them, etc. But he's more elaborate about this. He's basically describing the entire contents of the gospel and saying that they doubt all this stuff. And it's like, no, you, my fellow Christians, should insist that this stuff really happened. It's not a myth, right? And that suggests that's corroborating evidence that there's this sect of Christians who think it's all myth, right? So,
and that's in the 2nd century, because 2 Peter is clearly somewhere in the 2nd century.
Yeah, yeah. And then you can go on, you can look at 1 John, and then there's clues in Irenaeus and various other, Hippolytus, and there's these other writers where you can triangulate all these clues. But yeah, I think, like you said, we're gonna have to do a whole video just on that.
We do. Yeah, hey, thank you for being a Patreon member. We really appreciate it. Join the family if you haven't already. Thank you so much.